Hello, we're here with Sam Cho, who's running for Port of Seattle Commissioner position number 2. Would you like to go ahead with your 2-minute introduction?
Yeah, first, thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate it, and I know you guys have been doing this for a few days, so I'll try to make this quick. My name is Sam Cho. I am running for Seattle Port Commissioner position 2. It is, as you all know, an open seat, the one that's, Courtney Greger has decided not to run for again. Actually, the 36th has a very special place in my heart. My parents are immigrants from South Korea. They immigrated here from the late 1980s, and they actually immigrated, then they started out here in the 36th. If you go up Aurora and hit Fremont, my parents had a dry cleaners right on Fremont Ave. And so that's how my parents and my family got started. And so for me, this is really special. Just to introduce myself real quick, I am currently a small business owner. I have an export and trade business. I export agricultural products and farm products to Asia. Before that, I had the great honor of serving President Barack Obama as a political appointee. I was a special assistant at the U.S. General Services Administration, where I worked on a lot of environmental sustainability projects and federal contracting. And prior to that, I was a legislative assistant for a member of the United States Congress, Amrish Bera from the California 7th. He's a Democrat from the Sacramento area. Grew up here in Seattle, raised here in Seattle, did my undergraduate degree at American University in Washington, D.C., and I have a master's degree from the London School of Economics. I'm running for port because I think that the port needs to start working for the people. If any of you have driven to SeaTac, you've probably been stuck in that traffic. If you've ever gone through the security, you've probably been stuck in those lines. And I think it's time that the Port of Seattle starts working for the people of Greater Seattle. And that is my number one goal, is to make sure that the port is working for the people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now you may flip over the sheet of paper, and the responses are 2 minutes each. Jason, would you like to start?
Sure. What are your priorities and what do you plan to accomplish if you are elected?
Yes, so I have 4 priorities as Port Commissioner. First one is economic development and growth. I take this from a different approach than most people. Most people like to think of economic development as helping big companies grow and create jobs. I look at it from a small business standpoint. There are a lot of contracts that the port gives out. I think those contracts should go to small businesses. I think they should go to minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses. And as you all might know, I-1000 just passed in the state legislature. So there's a window of opportunity here for us to start giving more small business owners a chance to grow their businesses. The second priority for me is environmental sustainability. The port has the largest carbon footprint of any other institution in the state. So making sure that we transition to sustainable sources of energy, we electrify the port. We make sure that the companies that we work with, whether it's the airlines or the cruise liners, are doing their part in making sure that they are taking care of our environment. The third thing is accountability and transparency. The port has a history of some nefarious acts and scandals, and I really want to clean that up. And lastly, just because we are here running out of time, is stopping human and labor trafficking. Just about all labor trafficking and human trafficking happens to the port. It's a tragedy, and it's something we need to stop. I think in the past few years, there's been some movement towards this, but there's far more that we can be done. And I'm happy to answer more questions in detail in the later part of this interview regarding that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Question 2, Alice?
How should the Port Commission act to improve wages and working conditions for taxi drivers? In this era of Uber and Lyft, how does the port address issues of access, equity, and fair wages for drivers?
Thank you for this question, because I've actually been looking into this, and it's interesting to me because I come from a federal agency that did federal contracting. The port single sources their taxi dispatch, right? They basically have this bidding process, and they say, okay, this is the one taxi company that gets the dispatch to the Port of Seattle and SeaTac Airport. And so it's weird because it turns into this weird, crazy situation where one company gets that business, and then all these other taxi drivers are either pushed out or they're forced to join that dispatch company. I think it needs to be a competitive process, but I think there needs to be multiple dispatchers, one. And I think that, with Uber and Lyft, we should be providing a regulatory atmosphere where there's a level playing field. right? When Uber and Lyft undercuts taxi drivers, it's not good for the taxi drivers, but it's also not good for the Uber and Lyft drivers, right? When Uber and Lyft are squeezing their drivers to take lower cuts, or Uber and Lyft are taking a higher cut, right? So I am actually open to the idea of having a standard fee to the airport. There are a lot of cities that have this, where if you are going from point A, from one region of the city to the airport, everyone pays the same rate regardless, right? That way, if you're an Uber or Lyft person, you're not paying surge charges, or you're not getting gouged on the prices. And that way, if you're a taxi driver, there's a fair game there, right? And so I'm all about competition, obviously, as a business and entrepreneur, I'm all about competition, but I'm also about equal opportunity. So for me, it's all about making sure that the taxi drivers, the Lyft drivers, and the Uber drivers all have an opportunity at the same business.
Great, thank you. Michelle?
What opportunities do you see to advance the values of a Green New Deal at the port, supporting a strong local economy in ways that are environmentally sustainable and economically?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think the Green New Deal has really catalyzed this conversation towards how do we make a future towards more sustainable energy, something that helps our environment and protects our environment. One of the things that I would really like to look at is apprenticeship programs and programs that train the workforce so that they're better suited for this new Green Deal and revolution. I think that there's been a little bit of movement towards this, but not enough. And because, like I mentioned, the Port of Seattle has the largest and the highest carbon footprint of all of our institutions here, the port really has a burden on its shoulders to make sure that we are playing our part in promoting this, not just the Green New Deal and what it espouses, making sure we're protecting our environment, keeping the airlines accountable, getting them to transition to biofuels and more sustainable sources of energy. Making sure that cruise ships, right, are doing their part, right? And it's not just the companies, but the entire supply chain, down to the very, maybe even the very straw that they're using, on those cruise ships. So I think there are ways for us to put in rules and regulations that say, hey, look, you need to be serious about this. We will enforce this, and if you don't do it, right, then we will not do business with you, point blank and simple. And at the same time, and I know we're running out of time, but we should not be accomplices to, fracking and all these things. I know that we allow them to dock on our ports. I think that's ridiculous. And I think that what we need to do is, people say, oh, we're not actually the ones fracking, or, we're not, but, we're helping facilitate it. And I think we're an accomplice to something that we should not be supporting. And so as a candidate, I would also, look into that and make sure that we're not supporting things inadvertently or indirectly.
Great, thank you. Matt?
What infrastructure investments are needed to properly support the needs of the port?
So if anyone has driven to the SeaTac airport, you've probably been stuck in the traffic, right? If you come out of SeaTac, if you try to park, the Seattle Times wrote an article a few weeks ago that said, don't drive SeaTac, there's not enough parking, right? So I think SeaTac is blowing at the seams. It's at capacity. We need to figure out ways to, first of all, make sure that we are being cognizant of our neighbors in SeaTac. The SeaTac area, the Bay Area, those are the ones those people are disproportionately affected by the expansion of SeaTac. So making sure that whatever we do, we bring them into the loop, make sure they're aware, we get their feedback and consideration, and we make those changes. I am actually open to the idea of expanding the Moses Lake Airport and seeing whether or not we can actually offload some of the cargo and carrier. So as someone who exports from Washington, it doesn't make sense that I take Rainier chairs from Eastern Washington, truck them all the way to SeaTac, and then fly them out. Why can't I just take them to Moses Lake and fly them out from Moses Lake, right? Everything that we grow, wines, grapes, fruits, apples, all those things can be flown out from Moses Lake, and that would actually relieve a lot of the pressure to SeaTac Airport. Secondly, the Port of Seattle, with now it's Northwest Seaport Alliance and the heavy cargo shipping, there's going to be a lot more traffic going through the seaports. We need to look at railways that we can, right now when I ship something from Chicago to Seattle, it actually goes to Everett, and from Everett I got to truck it down to the Port of Seattle. That makes no sense to me, right? Why is there not a rail line that goes down there, or a barge that can go from Everett and bring it down to Seattle? So those are the investments we need to make. We need to make sure that we're being smart on logistics, on the logistics side. And that's where I think I'm unique, because as someone who has exported goods out of the Port of Seattle, as the only candidate who has done this, I understand the logistical challenges and the investments that we've made.
Great, thank you. And now we will open it up to questions, starting with Matt.
Do you think criminal history should be a barrier to employment at the port?
Depends on the crime. But in general, I don't think a person's past should burden them from a bright future.
Can I ask a follow-up to that question? So when you say depending on the crime, if we're talking about someone who, say, wants to work as an airport food worker or a union wage job, does it matter if that person, say, I don't want to say a specific crime,
Sure.
but has something that society would deem unforgivable? Does it matter if that person who's been released from the system,
Yeah.
do you think that that person should have access to that entry-level work?
I think everyone deserves a second chance, right? And I think that people should not be discriminated on something that they've done in the past if they truly have reconciled and served their time. I think people should, get an opportunity to make a living, right? Part of the homelessness problem we have here in Seattle is because people don't get that second chance. And so, if I were to answer your question, I said yes, I think people should get a second chance.
Thank you. All right.
What type of goods do you export?
I started out exporting eggs, which is interesting. This is a longer story than I can tell you, but 2 years ago when I left the Obama administration, there was a very bad outbreak of bird flu in Asia. Avian influenza was a huge issue, and all these chickens died. And if you don't have chickens, you don't have eggs. So what I did is I drove to Costco and figured out how much a 30 pack of eggs was, which was only $4 at the time. And I looked up online how much a carton of egg was in Korea, and it was $10, $4, $10. So that's when I called Wilcox Farms, and I talked to Andy Wilcox, and I said, hey, I have this idea, let me export your eggs, I can figure it out. They had never exported before. So, I leveraged my background in government bureaucracy, really, to navigate the regulations and figure out how to get all the certifications and everything I need to export it. And so since then, I've exported over 2.5 million pounds of eggs to Asia. It's great for farmers. I mean, this trade environment with Trump starting trade wars with left and right, it's actually been really good for farmers.
Jason?
Yes, there's a goal for our ports to be the most accessible
Yes.
in the country, and there's talk about Uber and Lyft are not accessible cars. There's a lack of signage, and King County has this program where they're hiring people with developmental disability. Could you explain or present your philosophy on ADA and being more accessible in general?
My philosophy is equal opportunity. Regardless of, if you're a person with a disability, you should have equal access to the resources that we provide as a government, as an institution. We should be making sure that the companies that work with the port are accommodating people. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we need to keep these companies accountable, right? And I would be totally for implementing regulations and laws that say you need ADA accessible vehicles. You're right, Uber and Lyft. Why is there not an option on here to call a car that's ADA accessible, right? If I'm on a wheelchair and I'm calling a car, right, I run the risk of getting a car that's not big enough or can't have store my wheelchair. That should be something that they provide, right? And so I'm 100% on board with this idea that we should have accessibility for people with disabilities.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sure.
You mentioned one of your priorities was the human
Yes.
trafficking. Can
Yes.
you tell us what?
Absolutely.
your,
So the Port of Seattle has taken steps towards stopping human trafficking. One of the things that you can do is train people to be aware of human trafficking activity, right? Whether it's a gentleman sitting next to a woman and the woman seems very shy, not talking. There's some signals, right? So the Port of Seattle has actually said, okay, all port employees need to go through this sort of training, right? And that's a good first step. But that's just not, in my mind, it's not good enough. What we need to do is mandate that training, not just for Port of Seattle employees, but for all the employees of airlines, for logistics companies, and make it and make sure that the full supply chain is also up on that. Does anyone know what a B Corp is? A B Corp is like a sustainability, it's like a company that gets certified for being sustainable and kind of more than just a for-profit entity. We need, I would love to look into other nonprofits that have this. I think we need a certification process that says this company is certified, and we have certified these companies that say they are taking measures to mitigate human trafficking. In the same way we have them certified for other things, right? So we'll make all the airlines go through the certification process and say, okay, your employees are getting these training, your employees are doing all these things to make sure you have those certifications.
Thank you. Jeff?
So we've interviewed 3 other candidates for this position. So I was wondering if you could speak to why we should vote for you vis-a-vis them. You've sort of spoken about why every candidate kind of in the back.
Sure.
Why you and not that specific?
So if I were to be completely honest with you guys, I feel like the 4 priorities I just mentioned are not new, right? Economic development, environmental sustainability, accountable transparency, human trafficking. You've probably heard a variation of those 4 policies, right? So I'm not here saying that like I have some crazy policy ideas. I mean, I can come up with crazy policy ideas, but that's what I'm here for. I think what distinguishes me is that I understand that ideas are one thing, but execution is another, right? You can have one thing I learned in the Obama administration when I worked for the president is that you can have the best idea and policy ever. Like, it could be great. Green New Deal, I love it, but can you execute it? Can you get it done? Can you get it passed, right? And if you look at my experiences and what I've done throughout my career, I think you'll see that this is a guy who can execute, who can get stuff done. He wants to export eggs, he can export eggs. I get it done. And I think that's where I distinguish myself. Is that other candidates are great, but at the end of the day, I can get it done. Yeah.
Matt, you have one?
So the port is a part-time job, and
Yes.
so obviously a lot of folks do keep their current jobs. So with the nature of your business, I do want to ask: are you going to maintain ownership of your export-import business? Okay.
I understand that could be a potential conflict of interest. I intend to fully leverage my experience as a business owner in exports to make sure that I'm doing a good job as a port commissioner, but I have no intention of keeping both. The nice thing about being young, single, without a family is that you can actually, take a meagerly paid job like this and still kind of survive. So I have no problems. I forgot to mention that I work in the state legislature for Senator Bob Osgood as his legislative assistant as well. I actually have experience in the state legislature, which also doesn't pay very well. And so, to answer your question directly, I will step away from the business. I will dissolve it, or sell it off, or get rid of it, so that we avoid any conflict.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Come on.
Okay. What do you see as the port's role with regard to immigration and separation?
Well, it shouldn't have a rule of separation. Like I said, I come from a family of immigrants, and the idea of when I think about me being separated from my mother as a child, if I were to be separated from my mother as a child, I wouldn't be here. And I don't think our port, whether it's the airport or seaport, should have any part in separating families, period. If anything, we should be bringing people in as a refuge and as a safe haven. And so, yeah, that's why I stand. I mean, I know that when that was happening, the port took this quick work. Some people took a very hard stance on that. Yeah, we will, again, like I said earlier with regards to fracking, we should not be an accomplice to these things. It's not us doing it per se, right? It's the federal government, but we're facilitating it, and I think that's wrong.
Great. Thank you so much. One more, Jason?
How do you work with the current commissioners elected?
Yeah. Well, you know, I've actually had the fortune of working with the commissioners in the state legislature. So when I worked as a legislative assistant for Senator Bob Asagawa, they actually all came and lobbied me. So it's really interesting because they're all on the other side. But I've talked to all the board commissioners. I have a pretty good relationship with several of them. I've talked to them about my candidacy, and I've actually fleshed my ideas with them, and they've given me their feedback as well. I have no concerns as far as getting along with the commission or anything. I think it's about time, though, that there's some diversity on the board commission, so that's really important to me. I think representation matters, and I feel like the good thing is that there are a lot of people of color running for the seat, so whether or not I get it, I think there's a good chance that a person of color will get it, so that's great. But for me, I'm a team player. I've always been a team player, and I think at the end of the day, there's 5, but we'll work together and get through it.
Great. Thank you. Would you like to go ahead and give a 30-second wrap up?
Yeah. Well, so I just want to thank you for your time. If people are watching this online, thank you for taking the time to watch it all the way through. It's a lot. But again, my name is Sam Cho. I'm running for Seattle Port Position 2, and it would be my honor to represent King County in Port. As I mentioned, I have a very large breadth of experience, both in the private and public sector. And to reiterate what I said earlier, if you're wondering why I am different from any other candidate, I think the one thing you should remember is that this is a guy who can execute, who can get it done. I've proven that through my own business experience, but also throughout my entire career in public service. So please vote for Sam Cho.
Thank you.